Chapter 9. Bill awoke to an itchy leg in a dark room. He reflexively reached for Ellen, but no one was on the other pillow. Confused, he opened his eyes and stared at the open bathroom door. The lights were off in there, too. After sitting up, he scanned the room and called her name, but found he was alone. He ran his hands through his hair as he tried to shake off sleep. The door chimed, and he stared at it with blinking eyes. Remembering he was mostly naked, he pulled on a pair of shorts and a tee before heading to the door. "Who is it?"
"It's Philip."
Bill furrowed a brow and opened the door. Janet stood a few feet back from Philip, her radiant smile making something stir. The grin on Philip's face looked sober for once, but his bloodshot eyes spoke of too much booze and not enough sleep.
"Did we wake you up?"
Janet asked. Bill nodded slowly but returned her smile. "Yeah, but I should get up anyway." He pointed to his leg. "It needs a few pills."
"Ah, gotcha," Philip said. "Well, we'll come back some other time."
"Some other time?" Bill asked in confusion.
"Yes," Janet said. "Want to shoot skeet?"
He scrunched his eyes shut for a moment before focusing on Philip. "Skeet? As in shooting clay thingies?"
"Pigeons,"
Philip nodded.
"Clay pigeons, not the real thing." He chuckled. "They have a trap range over at the North Beach."
"Trap range?" Bill echoed dumbly. "I don't know what that is." Philip didn't laugh.
"It's fancy for pigeon launcher. Basically, it's an excuse to shoot shotguns."
Bill felt a pang of anxiety. "I've never shot one, or anything other than laser tag pistols."
"Then you should definitely come with us," Janet said. "It's fun. You'll feel like a man afterward."
He wasn't sure what she meant by that, but decided to let it go. "Sounds fun? There's not going to be alcohol, is there?"
Philip rolled his eyes. "Of course not. Why do you think I'm sober?"
He suddenly looked incredibly proud of himself. Bill didn't know what to say to that other than, "Let me get my stuff." Leaving the door open, he retrieved his long-sleeved sun shirt, his pills, and sunglasses. He followed Philip and Janet to the path and found Mina awaiting them with her cart.
"Hello, Bill,"
she said as he climbed into the back.
"How's your leg?"
"Sore, but mending."
"That's good. All aboard? Yes, North Beach it is."
Mina drove down the eastern path. Bill had never seen this part of the island before, which made him curious about the East Beach. "So, the North Beach has skeet. What does the East Beach have?" Bill asked Philip. He opened his mouth to respond, but Janet cut him off.
"A nice grotto. It's beautiful, especially during the sunrise. At sunset?"
She shook her head with an embarrassed smile.
"Downright spooky. No lights near the grotto, so it's all shadows or pitch black depending on the moon until you get inside."
The path wound upward and the cart canted, making him glad he was wearing a seatbelt. The higher they rose, the sparser the palms. Sunlight bared down through the gaps, only occasionally managing to get beneath the tonneau.
"You planning on having dinner with us tonight?" Philip asked.
Bill nodded slowly. "Hadn't assumed otherwise. Why?" He scratched absently at his pant leg, hoping pus wasn't causing it to stick to the wounds. Janet beamed and said,
"Good. We enjoyed talking with you and Ellen last night. We'd like to do that again."
A little shocked, Bill said, "Thank you." She and her partner laughed.
"Don't look so surprised. Didn't you have fun?"
He blushed, barely remembering any details of his trip back from the South Beach and the party. "Russ told me I had a very good time." Philip snickered, his smile wider than ever.
"You did. We'll pace you this time, I promise,"
he said, holding his fingers up in a Boy Scout sign. She glanced at her husband before returning her gaze to Bill.
"Besides, it was Autumn's atomic vape that wiped you out, not ours."
He couldn't remember back that far and had to take their word for it. Before last night, he believed anything of Philip, but he thought maybe the guy was telling the truth. The cart finally pulled through the trees and onto the mostly barren bluff. A view of the blue ocean greeted Bill, its white waves moving south to smash into the rocky beach. Mina turned east and stopped next to a squat building resembling a smaller bungalow. Philip and Janet immediately left their seats and walked to the door. Bill took his time getting out of the cart, careful not to stress his leg. It had stopped itching, but the occasional ache pulsed through his nerves before disappearing. Mina flashed her wrist at the sensor, and the bungalow's door opened inward. It was dissimilar to their bungalow in that it was airtight. He followed Janet and Philip inside and stopped just past the threshold. 10 different shotguns hung from pegs inside a glass case. Each had a marvelous shine in their wooden stocks, their barrels gleaming beneath track lighting. "Wow," Bill said. "Yeah," Philip said, heading to the glass case. Mina ran her wristband over the case and the door slid aside. "Green had these custom made. Benelli over and under with a damn tight choke. If you're accurate, these are as good as it gets for trap shooting." Bill already knew he was about to be embarrassed. "And if you're not?" Janet turned to him.
"We'll help you learn."
Philip reached into the case and pulled one of the shotguns. Its barrel seemed much larger than the ones he'd seen on TV. "Here," he said, handing it to Bill. Bill backed away reflexively. It's not loaded, right?" Philip shook his head, a slight smile on his face. "No, sir. Won't be loaded until you load it." Once again, taking Philip at his word, he took the shotgun, noticed the breech was already open, and felt like an idiot. "Gotcha," he said, blushing. Philip handed one to Janet and pulled another for himself. Mina then slid the door closed and Bill heard it lock. "Let's go shoot some pigeons!" After a little more than half a mile, the path slowly wound its way down to the west beach. The incline strained Ellen's Achilles tendons, but she didn't mind the discomfort. Her body luxuriated in the stretching sensation, every touch or movement lighting her brain. Unbeknownst to her, the parasite had begun stimulating her basal ganglia again, and had stuffed her bloodstream with dopamine. The breeze rippled through her light sunshirt, making her nipples hard. Electric tingles of pleasure flowed up and down her spine, goose flesh peppering her skin in the heat. As she rounded the path and looked out over the lagoon, she wasn't surprised to see a lone figure standing waist-deep in the water. "Russ," she said aloud, quickening her step. Although she was a good 200 feet away from him, she could make out the smile in his body language. He walked through the water toward shore, but eventually crouched until his waist was once again below the gentle waves. She looked for Angelo or Nicholas, but didn't see either of them or a cart. Had he come down here by himself, as she had? The breeze shifted slightly, and she caught his scent. Another gush of dopamine hit her system, and her loins itched. She quickened her step and kicked off her sandals as she reached the surf's edge. Her toes dug into the wet sand, the sensation setting her nervous system alight as his scent drew her like an invisible leash. Russ looked up at her, his face set in a confused smile. "Something's wrong with me." He nosed the air, and his smile widened. "Can I smell you?" She pulled off her sunshirt and tossed it to the beach. Her bra and panties soon joined the pile. Russ moaned in surprise or maybe adoration and raised his hands from the water. She walked to him and cast her eyes down to her waist. Each side of her vulva had grown spherical pustules that jutted from the flesh. Thick white hairs surrounded the eggs, perhaps for protection or some other reason. She didn't know. All she knew was that they were beautiful, and she was the most attractive, confident woman on the planet. He reached for her, lovingly caressing the eggs. She moaned with pleasure and need, as did he. On the verge of a full-body orgasm, she pushed him further into the water. Like the supplicant he'd become, he obeyed without question. Once the water was past her waist, she held out a hand to him. He took it and pulled her to him. "There's nothing wrong with me," he whispered, "and nothing wrong with you." He nuzzled her neck, and his musk made her shiver. The goose flesh covering her skin vibrated every cell of her body, and she smiled wide. "Push against me," she breathed above the sound of the waves crashing into the distant barrier. Russ planted his feet in the sand and pushed his pelvis into hers. His mouth opened in ecstasy, and Ellen's eggs pulsed with want. Beneath the waves, the thick white hairs surrounding his ruined penis reached toward Ellen's eggs. Once they touched, the pair screamed in delight. The hair crept over the bulbous eggs, sperm streaming from their ends. A cloud of light gray billowed beneath them as the excess clouded the water. Her stiff and long new pubic hair absorbed some of the sperm, saving it for later. The current quickly dispersed it, but more streamed forth as the sacs that had once been testicles emptied themselves. The orgasm rocked her, and her fingers dug into his shoulders, deep enough to draw blood. Tears squirted from her eyes as she arched her back. He did the same, his head nearly touching the water. "You can feel like this always," a voice said in her mind. Ellen suddenly knew what the voice meant, and part of her resolve, part of herself, burned away. At that moment, she felt disgust for everything in her life before this moment. Bill, her career, all of it seemed so distant and unwanted. The sensations faded and they slowly stood straight. She hugged him, and he her. When she pulled away and looked at his face, she saw how dazzling his eyes were, his irises flecked with white. He looked as though he was in the presence of a goddess, awe and devout adoration sparkling from his smile. "Will you protect me?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, his hand gently touching her eggs. "With my life." She sighed, kissing him hard. "You're mine." Nodding, he touched her again. "I'm yours." "Tonight, I need her." His smile dissipated into confusion. "Who?" "Autumn," she whispered, and licked the lobe of his ear. "We need her." For a moment, she thought he would refuse her, but she watched as the confusion slowly gave way to realization, or perhaps acquiescence. "Yours," he said, kissing her neck. She grinned and stroked his hair. "We need to dress, lover." He whimpered with a frown. "Do we?" In truth, she would have happily stayed here with him until sunset, but they couldn't be found. Bill and Autumn couldn't know. Not yet. But soon. They watched from the ocean, unaware that the fish had completely departed this part of the lagoon in fear. Bill decided he loved the smell of gunpowder and oil. He also liked shooting. What he didn't like, however, was the ache in his shoulder from the shotgun's kick. He didn't know how many shells he'd fired and was afraid to ask, but he knew they'd gone through 4 tall stacks of pigeons. Mina packed up the gear, leaving the trio sipping from water bottles beneath the cart's tonneau. It was uncomfortably hot, but Bill didn't much mind. His leg had started hurting in earnest, and he popped his pain pills, as well as an anti-inflammatory. "Not bad for your first time," Philip grinned. "Not bad at all. I pronounce you fit to hit the broadside of a barn." Chuckling, Bill waggled his raised middle finger before Philip's face. The man laughed good-naturedly, as did Janet. Over the past hour or two, the pair had taught him shooting techniques, as well as how to operate the shotguns. Philip had broken down one of the weapons to show Bill how to clean it. He wondered how Ellen would feel if he took up shooting as a hobby. Mina locked the armory and returned to the cart. "Where to?" Philip and Janet looked at one another before turning to Bill. "Any ideas?" "Any way to get down to the beach from here?" Mina nodded. "Steep, but drivable. There's not much beach to visit, though, and there is a riptide." Philip snickered and pulled a small flask from his shorts. He popped the top, took a swig, and handed it to Janet. "Hell, dinner's a couple of hours away. Let's do it." Mina turned the cart and headed toward a trailhead that Bill hadn't noticed. The path snaked down the bluff, and Bill was again glad he was wearing his seatbelt as gravity tugged at him. Janet and Philip continued sharing the flask until they reached the bottom. The cart halted on an outcrop overlooking the ocean. Bill climbed out, his leg protesting, and walked to the edge. The outcrop was mere feet above the ocean's surface, and the clear water looked all too inviting. Something moved beneath the edge of the outcrop, and Bill held his gaze on that spot. A moment later, he saw a flash of something again. "Damn," Philip said, slurping on the dregs. "Where are all the fish?" He was right. Bill couldn't find a single fish in the area. The lagoon had schools of them. Where were they all? "Thought I saw," he said, walking to the edge. He started to lean over, but stopped. A massive glowing green crab stared upward at him from the sand and rock. The thing had large, disgusting pulsing sacs beneath its anterior. Was this what Ellen and Russ had seen? The crab beckoned with a forelimb. Philip moved close to Bill, and Janet soon joined them, the 3 of them mesmerized by the glowing crustacean. After a few minutes, the man said, "Never seen that before."
"Not on the TV," Janet added. "Not in an aquarium."
Bill dropped to one knee and peered over the edge. The crab scuttled so it faced him again, its forelimbs still waving in that come-hither gesture. He reached as though to touch the water, and the creature's anterior exploded with squirming, wriggling worms.
"What the fuck was that?"
Janet asked, stepping backward from the edge. Several of the worms shot straight at Bill before touching the surface and diving toward the sandy bottom. If you had been down there, they would have gotten you. He frowned at that thought. Where had it come from? From Ellen and Russ, obviously. Theirs had been a cautionary tale of sorts. He wondered if their crab had been as large as this one. Was it the same crab? He looked around until he found it. It no longer beckoned them, but its eye stalks regarded them with an alien malevolence. Philip whistled.
If looks could kill.
That's just creepy,
Janet said. Mina, Bill called over his shoulder. Have you seen this crab before? She walked to them from the cart and peered over the outcrop.
No, Bill, I haven't seen anything like that.
He studied her face for a moment, looking for signs of a tell, but didn't find one. As far as he could discern, it was the truth.
But it's gorgeous, she said, her voice trailing off, and a little terrifying.
Bill regained his feet. From here, the crab didn't look unfriendly, but somehow less real.
So, you got a net?
Philip asked Mina. She shook her head.
We don't have a rack of supplies here. No one comes here.
Damn, he said.
I'd like to catch that thing.
Bill sucked his teeth at the thought. I'd rather not see it again, he said softly.